Welcome to the world of English language teaching and learning. Accuracy, fluency, and appropriacy are known as triple pillars of English language teaching and learning. Accuracy describes the ability to write, speak a foreign language without making grammatical, vocabulary, spelling, and pronunciation mistakes. It is often contrasted with fluency. Classroom activities are sometimes categorized into those that promote fluency and those that promote accuracy. For example, a learner makes lots of grammar and pronunciation mistakes. His speech is not very accurate, but he speaks so fluently and expressively that everyone understands him. On the other hand, fluency is the ability to speak the language smoothly, naturally, and without too much hesitation or pausing. Fluency is sometimes also referred to writing. In this case, it means writing with ease, coherently, and with flow. For example, he is a native speaker, but he speaks so slowly. He is always searching for words, hesitation, and pausing. He lacks fluency in this case. His lack of fluency, makes us feel very difficult to follow him. Appropriateness or appropriacy. It refers to the degree of suitability that there is between a piece of language and the social context in which it is used. When the piece of language matches the social context, it is said to be appropriate. When it does not match, it is said to be inappropriate. To match, it needs to be of an equivalent degree of formality. Appropriacy can be seen in pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, or discourse. The terms appropriacy and appropriateness are often used interchangeably in this meaning. For example, I will learn my English by chatting informally with my friends. When I started working in an office, I had to make a definite effort to get the appropriacy of my language right. This is the example that one can keep it for understanding appropriateness. Acquisition learning distinction again is a very important concept. Acquisition refers to the way in which languages are learned unconsciously or picked up by exposure to comprehensible input. In this definition, the term acquisition is used in contrast to learning, which is seen as a deliberate and conscious process of rule learning and self-monitoring of language use. However, the terms acquisition and learning are used interchangeably by some writers. For example, she learned German simply through acquisition, hearing and reading it all around her and chatting with friends. She never studied it. The acquisition learning distinction is the most fundamental of the five hypotheses in Krashen's second language acquisition theory, the most widely known among the linguists and language teachers. According to Krashen, there are two independent systems of foreign language performance, the acquired system and the learned system. The acquired system or the acquisition is the product of a subconscious process very similar to the process children undergo when they acquire their first language. It requires meaningful interaction in the target language, natural communication, in which speakers are concentrated not on the form of their utterances but in the communicative act. The learned system or the learning is a product of formal instruction and it comprises a conscious process which results in conscious knowledge about the language. For example, knowing of a grammar rules. A didactic approach in the teacher-centered setting produces learning, while an inductive approach in the student-centered setting leads to acquisition. What is meant by affective filter? Certain researchers into language acquisition, particularly Stephen Krashen, maintain that language learning is facilitated or obstructed by an affective filter. The filter is made up of attitudes or feelings which are set to control and select the input learners absorb from their environment. If their affective filter is set low, learners are open to receive input. If it is set high, they are stressed, anxious, poorly motivated, that they are not open to receiving input. Now, the next term that we would like to discuss is approach. What is the difference between approach, method, and methodology? They are also sometimes used interchangeably. An approach to language teaching is the set of beliefs on which the teaching is based. The beliefs cover what language is, how it is used and learned. From these beliefs, a set of teaching practices are built. The terms method and approach are, as I said, used interchangeably in various contexts, with approach being used nowadays more commonly than method. Perhaps it implies a less rigid set of teaching practices than method. For example, the lexical approach and the direct method, grammar translation method. That is what people refer to. For example, if you take communicative approach, it is based on a wide view of what constitutes language and language use. What methods should be used to teach the language and the language use are still hotly debated when it refers to communicative approach. Method. A method is a recognized set of teaching techniques and procedures that put into practice a set of beliefs about teaching and learning. The term is sometimes used interchangeably with the approach, while others reserve approach to refer to theories and principles of language teaching. According to Richards and Rogers, a method is theoretically related to an approach. Is It is organizationally determined by a design and is practically realized in procedure. That is the definition they have given. Some prominent methods in English language teaching include total physical response, task-based learning, grammar translation method, um, etc. A teaching method covers syllabus, materials, and classroom activities. Now, methodology. What is methodology? The typical practices, procedures, techniques that a teacher uses in the classroom and that may or may not be based on a particular method. Methodology can also refer to the study of those practices and procedures and techniques and of the beliefs and principles on which they are based. What is meant by CLT? It stands for Communicative Language Teaching. It is generally agreed that it refers to teaching language for use in communication rather than as an object of study. There is much disagreement as to how the methodology it should involve, with some experts advocating that the only way to teach communication is to put learners into situations where they need to communicate, while others believe that the language study can also aid communication. Use of pair and group work and free use of language are typical of communicative classroom. For example, when we first started learning or teaching, we used the structural approach, teaching vocabulary, structures, mainly through drilling a substitution table or exercises. When the communicative approach came along, we were expected to focus on functions and we were expected to use pair and group work and get all the students involved in language use. It is quite challenging, of course, in the classroom situation. Next, we will move on to CLIL. It stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. It refers to an educational practice in primary, secondary, and tertiary context where subject teaching and learning take place in a non-native language. Content is placed before language in the acronym because subject content determines the choice of language used to teach subject matter as well as language which learners use in order to communicate their knowledge, ideas about curricular content. What differentiates CLIL from ELT and other approaches such as content-based instruction is the planned pedagogic integration of contextualized content, cognition, communication, and culture into teaching and learning practice. What is meant by eclecticism? It is also known as eclectic approach. It is an approach to teaching and learning which does not adhere to any one recognized approach but selects from different approaches and methods according to teaching preference and also to the belief that different learners learn in a different ways in a different context and that therefore no one approach or method is sufficient to cater to the range of learners. Eclectic approach is sometimes criticized as being too random and having no guiding principles. The criticism has given rise to principled eclecticism, which attempts to keep the flexibility of eclecticism while including in it the principles of teaching and learning. The difference between eclecticism and principled eclecticism is that the random manner in which the principles are chosen. Principled eclecticism involves a few principles of language learning. Therefore, it is a guided a teaching practice. Finally, you have communicative competence. Communicative competence is a very important concept. It refers to learners' ability to use language to communicate successfully. Communicative competence is a term in linguistics which refers to the language uses grammatical knowledge, syntax, morphology, and phonology, as well as social knowledge about how and when to use utterances appropriately. The term was coined by Telheims in the year 1966, reacting against the perceived inadequacy of Noam Chomsky's distinction between competence and performance. Canal and Swine in the year 1980 defined communicative competence as composing competence in four areas. Number one, grammatical competence, referring to words and rules. It means the learner should know how to use the grammar, syntax, and vocabulary of a language. It indirectly is known as linguistic competence. It might ask, what kind of words do I know? How do I use these words in the sentence structure? That is the first component of communicative competence. The second component refers to socio-linguistic competence. That also refers to appropriateness. It means a learner should know how to use and respond to language appropriately, given the setting, the topic, and the relationship among the people communicating. Sociolinguistic competence should ask what words and phrases fit in this particular setting and this topic. How can I express a specific attitude, namely courtesy, authority, friendliness, respect, when I need to communicate? How do I know what attitude another person is expressing? All these points help us understand socio-linguistic competence. The third component refers to discourse competence. It also refers to the use of cohesion and coherence. Knowing how to interpret the larger context and how to construct longer stretches of language so that parts of sentences and paragraphs make up a coherent whole. Discourse competence also asks how our words, phrases, and sentences are put together to create conversation, speeches, email messages, newspaper articles. Finally, the fourth component refers to strategic competence, referring to appropriate use of communicative strategies. It involves a learner knowing how to recognize and repair communication breakdowns and how to work around gaps in one's knowledge of the language and how to learn more about language and in this context. Strategic competence also asks some of the questions like this: how do I know when I have misunderstood or when someone has misunderstood me? What do I say then? How can I express my ideas if I do not know the name of something or the right verb form to use in a particular context? All these four components constitute communicative competence. The very base of English language learning and teaching is acquiring communicative competence. Therefore, this particular concept is a very important concept.